It's time to kick ass and chew bubble gum, and I'm all out of gum.
Hey there guys, Nordic Warrior here, welcome back to my video game review series. So those of you who have been following my channel will know that in my last video I reviewed Duke Nukem Forever from 2011. As long-time subscribers of mine will know, it's a game that I have some very unpopular opinions on, and I wanted to give it a proper, long, in-depth retrospective review. Long story short, it's a game that was tore apart by critics when it came out, and sadly it flopped. Despite this, I actually really enjoyed it. And it's a game that, while flawed, I think is underrated. Upon completing the game again, I suddenly got the urge to replay some of the older Duke Nukem games and see how they compare in retrospect. For some reason I decided to check out the Microsoft Store on my Xbox One, which I don't normally do these days, since I'm not really into modern games anymore. To my surprise, I saw listed in the store that they had the 20-year anniversary remaster of Duke Nukem 3D. Which actually came out back in 2016. Initially I wasn't going to bother with it since I didn't think it would be worth the price. Then I saw the price, and saw that the Microsoft Store had the game on sale for $159. Yeah, you heard me correctly, the game was on a temporary 90% off sale, and this just happened to be when I was browsing. So needless to say, I bought the game and decided to play through it. A bit of backstory about the game, and about my personal history with it. Those of you who have been following my channel for a while will know that last year I actually reviewed the PS1 version of Duke 3D, known as Duke Nukem Total Meltdown. And up until now, that version was my only experience of the game. I was never much of a PC gamer as a kid, so Duke Nukem was a franchise that I was never introduced to until the release of Forever in 2011. In fact, it was due to how much fun I had with Forever that made me want to check out the older games in the series, leading to me buying the PS1 version of Duke 3D. As I mentioned in that review, the PS1 version was pretty flawed. It was basically the same as the PC version in terms of its overall gameplay and level design. However, it had a few major problems, mostly in regards to the game's overall technicalities. It had some absolutely horrendous frame rate issues, as well as dodgy controls that didn't really translate well to the PS1. It felt like a cheap port rather than a remake. It did, to its credit, have some exclusive content, such as a remastered soundtrack, which was in my opinion actually better than the original, as well as the new 4th episode, although the episode, if truth be told, was pretty poorly made in my opinion. But overall, I'd say the PS1 version was definitely a downgrade from the original PC classic. If you want to know more, I'll leave a link to my review for the PS1 version in the description section, as well as my other Duke Nukem game reviews. As far as the original version goes, the game was released in 1996, developed by 3D Realms, and it's a game that's now legendary. Without a doubt, this is the game that made Duke Nukem a household name, and really set the standard for future games in the series. The game bears a strong resemblance to other first-person shooters from the time, such as Doom or Dark Forces, both games that had similar shooting mechanics. In fact, there was a time where this game was generally considered a Doom clone by a lot of PC gamers, and you can see why since both games look very similar. However, in my personal opinion, calling the game merely a Doom clone is selling it a bit short.
That's one doomed space marine.
Because as far as I'm concerned, this game is better than Doom, despite its flaws. Duke Nukem 3D is genuinely one of the best first-person shooters from the 90s. With this version of the game of course being a remake, I wasn't really sure what to expect going in, particularly when you consider the overall state of gaming when it came out. As I said before, the game came out in 2016, and it was initially released to mark the 20th anniversary of Duke 3D. Surprisingly, the game isn't just a copy and paste remake of the original, with modern day graphics, which is what I was expecting it to be. Gearbox instead opted to keep the game's original visual aesthetic, and stay as true to the original game's level design and gameplay as possible, while allowing the game to be played in full HD. with much clearer and more polished graphics. It makes the game much more aesthetically pleasing than the original, while not taking away the charm and style that the original game had. And I don't know about you guys, but I actually really like this. For me, this was a great idea since it allows gamers like myself who never got to play the original growing up, as well as the younger modern gamers, a chance to experience the game as it was meant to be played, while fixing a lot of the technical issues the original had, due to the technical limitations of the time. There are also several features that were added for the sake of convenience, which again I appreciate. More on those features a bit later. Now let's break down the game. So the game is of course a first-person shooter, where you play as Duke Nukem, the ultimate badass. Duke Nukem, for those of you who don't know, is basically a satire of classic 80s and 90s action movie heroes. A roided up, gunslinging maverick who is basically a one-man army. Voiced of course by the legendary John St. John, who gives Duke his hilarious and badass personality and charisma.
Those alien bastards are gonna pay for shooting up my ride.
He's the type of character you just don't see in modern media. The game is split up into episodes, each with their own set of levels. In this game you get 5 episodes in total. You get of course the original 3 episodes from the game, LA Meltdown, Lunar Apocalypse and Shrapnel City. You also have the 4th episode known as The Birth, which was originally included in the Atomic edition of the game. And finally you have an entirely new 5th episode, called Alien World Order. This episode was released exclusively for this version of the game. Sadly they didn't add the episode called Plug and Pray, which was the 4th episode that was exclusive to the PS1 version as I mentioned before. I get that Plug and Pray wasn't the best episode and it was quite poorly designed, but it still would have been nice to see it remastered here, and it would have served as more content for this version of the game, doing its bit to help to justify the asking price. So yeah, that was a bit of a missed opportunity, but I digress. One thing I always liked about the game is the maze-like level design. Unlike a lot of first-person shooters, the game doesn't feel at all linear. Each level is basically its own sandbox, filled with secret areas to explore, as well as items and weapons to find and collect. As I mentioned before, each episode consists of individual levels, and every single one of them is unique and fun to play through. As far as the game's story goes, it's very simple, and it doesn't take itself too seriously. The first episode, LA Meltdown, of course takes place in LA. The aliens have launched a full-scale invasion, and are attempting to eliminate Earth's men, and enslave Earth's women, using them for twisted experiments. They have also mutated and corrupted hordes of humans, turning them into pig cops. Duke will have to traverse the levels, wiping out the aliens and saving the world. This particular episode takes place entirely on Earth. The second episode, Lunar Apocalypse, on the other hand, takes place entirely in space. The EDF space station, as well as the moon, have been taken over by the aliens, prompting Duke to travel there to wipe them out. The aliens have also kidnapped numerous babes and are attempting to use them to breed sick alien hybrids. Duke will of course put a stop to this. The third episode, Shrapnel City, like the first, takes place entirely on Earth, and Duke will once again have to deal with an alien invasion on a much larger scale, and will even have to confront their leader, the Cycloid Emperor, kicking his ass and saving Earth once again. As I mentioned before, these are the 3 episodes that were in the original release of the game. As I mentioned before, in addition to these episodes, you also have The Birth from the Atomic Edition. This episode has 10 new levels, and they consist of Duke having to contend with a new type of alien enemy. These aliens are genetically engineered and more powerful than the standard ones. The level design here is similar to the other episodes, with maze-like levels filled with twists and turns and secret areas all over the place. But you can tell that they were developed at a different time. The episode culminates in an underwater boss battle against the alien queen. Again, as I previously mentioned, in addition to these 4 episodes, you also have a brand new 5th episode called Alien World Order. This episode was specifically developed for this release of the game, and as you might expect given the title of this release of the game, World Tour. Duke literally goes on a world tour that takes him across several iconic locations across Earth, such as Amsterdam, Moscow, London, Giza, Paris, San Francisco, Rome, and even Hollywood.
I'm gonna roast your nuts over an open fire, you flaming alien bitch.
So yeah, Duke travels across Earth, kicking alien ass all over again. These levels are absolutely insane, with some incredibly creative level design, puzzles and lots of enemies, mostly consisting of enemies from the other episode, as well as some new ones. The level culminates in a brand new boss battle, known as the Cycloid Incinerator. One of the things you'll notice right off the bat with Duke 3D is that the game is incredibly fast paced, and it never feels in any way linear or repetitive. The controls and gameplay are really solid for 1996, and in my opinion they still hold up today, and this is only improved with the updated visuals. The game is incredibly graphic for its time. Duke will be able to blast enemies to pieces with a variety of different weapons. Unlike in most modern first-person shooters, in this game you can carry as many weapons as you want, and there are plenty to choose from. The game rewards both exploration and experimentation by placing weapons and useful items in secret areas hidden around the levels. Some of these secret areas are quite easy to find, others are incredibly well hidden. This of course adds to the replay value, since you may want to replay levels to find a particular weapon or item you may have missed. Thankfully the game allows you to take these weapons and items to the next level once you finish. In most cases. One level in the first episode, Death Row, sees Duke get captured and lose all his weapons, but this only happens once. Speaking of weapons, you of course have all the weapons from the original release of the game, as well as some new ones. You start the game off with a pistol, which is the weakest gun in the game, but useful against basic enemies nonetheless. You can hold plenty of ammo for it. A badass shotgun, which is probably my favourite gun in the entire game, since I just personally found it to be the most practical, and the most effective from close range. There's also ammo for it all over the place. A chain gun cannon, also known as a Ripper cannon. This is a machine gun with 3 barrels, which is more effective from long range than the shotgun, but does less damage. An RPG, which of course can take out most enemies in one hit. This is also pretty effective against larger enemies as well as boss, and absolutely deadly from long range, though be careful of your rockets in close range of course. It can also be useful when uncovering secret areas, hidden behind breakable walls and objects. You have some unique, quirky weapons such as a shrinker, which allows Duke to shrink enemies to the size of an action figure before stomping on them with his mighty foot. This is really effective against some of the tougher enemies in the game, and can really bail you out in some tougher fights. A freezer that freezes enemies, who would have thought, allowing Duke to smash them to pieces. This is really fun to do. You also have some throwing weapons such as pipe bombs. These are extremely powerful remote grenades that can be used to take out multiple enemies in close proximity. Again, just be careful of your own explosions of course. They can be quite unpredictable.
Let God sort him out.
Some laser trip mines. These can be placed anywhere in the level to trap enemies. Although if truth be told, I found myself not really using these much, since the enemy AI never seemed to walk into them. I have heard that these are more useful in multiplayer. And of course you have Duke's signature boss weapon, the badass Devastator. The Devastator is one of the most iconic weapons in gaming. A rapid-fire twin rocket launcher that can take out most enemies immediately. The Devastator is one of the most gloriously overpowered weapons that makes you want to conserve your ammo, since you never know when you might need it. It's very handy for taking out bosses. You also have Duke's mighty foot, which is the game's standard melee attack. These are all the weapons from the main game. With the 4th episode you also have a brand new weapon, the Expander, though I found myself hardly ever using this. And in the new 5th episode you also have another brand new weapon, the Incinerator. This basically launches fireballs at enemies to take them out. So yeah, the game has plenty of interesting weapons to find and use throughout, and sometimes it's even difficult to choose from them. In addition to the weapons, there are also plenty of useful items. You can find health packs of different kinds all over the game. Some of these will heal you immediately, others are portable and can be used at any time. In addition to regular health packs, you can also find atomic health pickups. These can actually boost your health beyond its capacity, and are usually hidden in secret areas. These are of course very useful, so look out for them. You have steroids which can be taken to give you a boost of speed. Again, I didn't really use these very often, but they do allow you to run faster, which could be useful in the right situation. It could also help you to escape enemies. Night vision goggles, which obviously help you see in the dark. You have a Holo Duke, which basically projects a holographic version of Duke that allows you to distract enemies. This is quite useful against certain tougher enemies in the game, and can really bail you out. And you have my personal favourite, the jetpack. The jetpack is one of those items that makes the game seem even bigger, allowing you to reach previously unreachable areas, as well as secret areas and collectibles. Flying around the levels is really fun, and I'm actually surprised that a game from 1996 allowed you to do this. The jetpack can also be used to avoid difficult platforming sections, and can even be used to flank certain enemies. It's even pretty useful against bosses. It has limited fuel however, so use it well. So yeah, the game has a whole bunch of useful weapons and items. This of course adds to the replay value. In addition to weapons and items, you also have plenty of enemy variety, particularly for the time. You have standard pig cops, which are humans that have been mutated and brainwashed by the aliens. They usually carry standard weapons such as shotguns which can be looted from them. You have assault troopers, which are the standard alien enemies. Some of these will fly around. You also have tougher variants of them. These are called assault captains. These enemies can teleport and are quite annoying. You have enforcers, which are larger, more durable enemies. These take longer to bring down and seem to do more damage. The assault commanders, who are these huge, flying fat blobs that fire rockets from their asses. I'm not kidding. These are a pain in the ass to fight, particularly from close range. They always seem to be placed in the most inconvenient locations also. Octobrains that fly around and hit you with energy blasts. You often see these in underwater sections of the game. They are more durable than most enemies and look absolutely terrifying. Thankfully they're not as annoying as the ones in Duke Nukem Forever, and they don't spit rockets and explosives back at you. You have recon patrol vehicles that are basically peg cops in a flying vehicle. Sentry drones, which are probably the most annoying enemy in the entire game. These are basically flying machines that fly right at you and explode in your face. Seriously, enemies like this are the most annoying thing in first-person shooters, and the second episode is absolutely full of them. You have Slimers, which basically parody the face huggers from Alien. Small, weak enemies that get in your face. They can be annoying in large numbers, despite being easy to beat one-on-one. You also have auto-turrets. These are pretty self-explanatory. And you even have sharks in some of the underwater sections of the game. The toughest standard enemy in the game is the Battle Lord Sentry. These are basically smaller versions of the first boss that occupy some of the later levels in the game. These are very overpowered when compared to the other enemies. In the fourth episode you have two new enemy types. First you have the Pig Cop tanks. These are very tough. And you have the Protector drones, also known as the Alien Beasts. These are quicker, less predictable enemies that charge you and try to overwhelm you with melee attacks. Some of them even shrink you. In the new fifth episode you even have Firefly troopers. These are some flying enemies that carry incinerators. So yeah, as I mentioned before, the game has a whole bunch of enemies to fight throughout. In addition to these enemies, the game also has some pretty epic boss battles. Each of the game's episodes will end in a boss battle. These can be quite challenging on a first playthrough. However, once you figure out how to exploit the AI, they become pretty easy. You basically circle around them and look for cover, shooting them as you go. You of course have the 3 bosses from the original episodes, as well as the 2 new ones as I mentioned before. Upon completing each boss battle, you get an ending cutscene. These are pretty funny.
I'm Duke Nukem, and I'm coming to get the rest of you alien bastards.
So yeah, that basically sums up the game's main features. It's a badass retro shooter, with maze-like levels, incredible combat and plenty of level and location variety. Speaking of level and location variety, I was actually really surprised in retrospect to see just how interactive the game's levels are. There are plenty of shortcuts, as well as curiosities to interact with. Some of these are as simple as drinking water from a fountain to increase your health, launching rockets, demolishing buildings, or even stopping to take a leak.
Much better.
You can even play a game of pool or sing karaoke.
Born to be wild.
For 1996, it was incredible to see a game with levels that were this interactive. You can even do things such as view CCTV cameras to find secret areas and things you might have missed. This doesn't seem like a big deal nowadays, but again in 1996 this was incredible. The game also has plenty of hidden Easter eggs to find throughout, such as funny references to movies and other games.
Now this is a force to be reckoned with.
And even messages that were hidden by the developers in areas you weren't supposed to get to. I really appreciate stuff like this. The 5th episode even has some new ones.
Why so serious, Sam?
You may have noticed that the voice acting is much clearer this time than in the original. John actually returned to re-record his lines from the original, as well as some new ones for the 5th episode.
Looks like San Francisco is a sanctuary for illegal aliens.
I really appreciate this. Some of the features that were added to this release were also quite interesting. For example, they added a replay feature. This allows you to rewind through levels after you die. You can choose to go back as far as you want. I really appreciate this feature, since the game does have some difficulty spikes as well as a few cheat deaths. This was a pain in the ass in the PS1 version, particularly if you forget to save. Thankfully this isn't an issue here. Some fans of the original might have an issue with this, but personally I think it made the game less time consuming and more user friendly, so I like it. You also get a level select where you can choose each level of each episode individually if you want to, so that's good. Again, it makes the game more user friendly. So yeah, that pretty much sums up my overall thoughts on Duke Nukem 3D. This is a game that is a true timeless classic. I think the thing I like most about the game is that it doesn't take itself too seriously, and it knows what it is. It's a game that is challenging, but never feels unfair, and it has an incredibly intellectually stimulating feel to it. The levels require a lot of thought to complete, and it really is fun to play through them and find the secret areas. They really don't make games like this anymore, and it's a true blast from the past. If you guys have never played a Duke Nukem game, I highly recommend checking this one out, because it's without a doubt the game that made the series a household name. Sure, the game isn't perfect, and due to the technical limitations of the time it does have some issues, but for its time it's a masterpiece and I had an absolute blast with it. I give Duke Nukem 3D a solid 8 out of 10, easily one of the best first person shooters to be released in the 90s, and it's a game that really did a lot for the genre. The 20th anniversary edition of the game is a fantastic remaster that adds some improvements and allows console gamers to experience a more convenient version of the original game, while staying true to the original game and the overall feel and experience of it, and I would totally recommend it. Thanks for watching guys, I really enjoyed playing and reviewing Duke Nukem 3D. Stay tuned for more retrospective video game reviews. Once again I have a lot of reviews coming to the channel in the near future. Thanks for watching and God bless.
Game